Winter season is here again, and that means cozy nights by the fire, eggnog in hand, and redesigning your best holiday-themed Fakemon. For the last few years, with a few breaks along the way, I've been hosting Fakemon redesign challenges over on my community Discord. This tradition has brought out some amazing designs from the talented artists in our community, as they explore what makes the holiday season special to them through a Pokemon design of their own. This year, I decided to change things up just a bit. Last month, I asked all of you to participate in 2 steps. First, submit only prompts. No drawings, just a description. These prompts included what the Fakemon looks like, a brief Pokedex entry, maybe a naming and a typing. I then read through everything and paired these prompts into 10 pairings. Now here's the twist for the second part of this challenge. Artists were not allowed to draw their own submission. Instead, they had to interpret their partner's prompt and bring that Fakemon to life in their own unique art style. The goal was to create 10 counterpart Pokemon pairs, based on complementary or contrasting winter themes, personalities, abilities, just as real counterpart Pokemon work in the franchise. In this video, we'll be exploring each pair in no particular order. I'll be explaining the logic behind the pairings, why I thought they worked as counterparts, and of course highlight the fantastic art submitted by you. Plus, I'll showcase the 3 pairs that I chose to redesign myself. Keep in mind, I am not a professional artist. My goal with these redesigns was to unify the pairings in my cohesive style, and to spotlight what made them stand out to me. As we dive in, I will also share my personal thoughts on Pokemon design philosophy, drawing from what I've learned while working on my own Fakemon region. Speaking of which, my full-length, multi-episode visual novel series exploring this region, over 100 original designs, characters, a plot, and more, is set to debut in 2025. As many of you know, this project has been a labor of love for years, and I could not be prouder of the progress that I've made behind the scenes. As mentioned in a previous video, be on the lookout for a casting call in the coming months, as all major characters will be fully voice acted, and I need your help. These will be paid roles. With that out of the way, let's jump into your incredible holiday Fakemon submissions. First up, we have submissions from the Puff and Mega Rayquaza. Rayquaza's rendition of Puff's Charodent is a fairy and fire-type mouse that transforms berries into a chocolate-like liquid, using its tail to help lost travelers in snowstorms. And Mega Rayquaza's Sendal, drawn by Puff, is inspired by the Catalonian Tio de Nadal, a boar that stores food in its bark-like back, connecting to a winter tradition where children knock food loose with sticks. These two make a fantastic winter-themed duo, but I did notice a few areas for refinement. Mega Rayquaza's Charodent design captures the Pika clone vibe perfectly with its burnt orange palette, and a thoughtful concept art for a tail feature. Still, I'd love to see a bit more focus on the tail, if that makes sense, as it's such a key part of the concept, emphasizing its design or adding some more detail to it. Pokemon designs are always function-based, meaning you should be able to discern a Pokemon's abilities or behaviors simply by looking at its static artwork to some extent. Meanwhile, Puff's Sendal cleverly blends log and boar elements, but the green and red markings could use more clarity. Are they bristles, foliage, or something else? Adding textures and small visual hints would better communicate its materials and its function. That said, the cracked wooden lines are a nice touch. Great work from both artists, with just a few tweaks to take these designs to the next level. This is a great start. Next, we've got submissions from Paradigm and Dolphin Dance 10. Paradigm's Odoborealis is a ice and ghost walrus with icicle-like tusks, formed from frozen tears. It's supposedly based on the Aurora Borealis legends, with connections to spirits and death. Meanwhile, Dolphin Dance 10's Phoenihil is a radiant fairy-type phoenix that rises once a year, symbolizing hope and renewal after loss. Naturally, I paired these two because they beautifully contrast yet complement each other in a way that great legendary duos do. Odoborealis represents endings and melancholy, while Phoenihil represents beginnings and hope. Together they form a nice representation of the life-death cycle and celestial phenomena, auroras, supernovas, new moons, the works. Their art reflects this as well. Paradigm's rendition of Phoenihil is a beautifully simple and nostalgic. It almost reminds me of the Gen 1 legendary birds. Also, the decision to make the tails look like contrails or perhaps the burst of a firework is genius. A great reminder that Pokemon silhouettes should always be memorable and play with exaggerated geometry so their body parts can be reminiscent of something, even if that thing itself is not part of the body. In this case, fire or vapor. This is just feathers that resemble them. Now, Dolphin's rendition of Odoborealis, the counterpart, has some really nice instincts with these more fantastical glowing eyes to represent the typing and the concept. The pastel colors of the Aurora are also pretty pleasing. But one thing I did see room for improvement with both designs was reducing the amount of conceptual contrast. And what I mean by that is that both designs definitely respect and incorporate the fantastical elements their partner included in the prompt submission, but in some places they feel a bit jarring. For example, Phoenihil has a relatively plain body type, eyes, and coloration, with the glowing elements on the wings feeling out of place for some reason, because of how plain the rest of the body is. Same with Odoborealis to a greater extent, who has very realistic walrus body features, but a massive aurora next to it with no transition, like making the fur around its neck more prominent and obvious that the aurora is billowing out of it. I also want to fix the expressions to really play up the counterpart nature. I want Phoenihil to look carefree and jubilant, whereas Odoborealis should look melancholy and cursed. So for my Phoenihil, I wanted to make the whole body look more expressive and dynamic to match the concept and bring in contrast with its more downtrodden counterpart. So these wings are outstretched, revealing circular, glowy, fiery feathers that showcase its cosmic roots. I also opted for a more circular tail shape, looking not just like fireworks, but also cosmic, like a galaxy or nebula swirling around. I definitely appreciated the original's design emphasis on the firework shape shooting up straight, and I'm not saying my rendition of the tail is objectively better, but I think there's merit to this more unique shape with the glowy bits coming off of it. Sometimes small touches like that can really convey motion in a static design. For a Pokemon with powers or personalities like this one, I always take a few moments while designing to close my eyes and think hard about how I can convey motion in my illustration. Lastly, I also opted for a much more cohesive color palette. Though the originals was nice and simple, I think all these warm colors make this Pokemon white hot and ethereal, with clear textures for both the cosmic and regular wing-like sections. In my mind, this Pokemon looks otherworldly but also approachable and cute. These Pokemon rise only once a year, said to bring good luck and hope to the days beyond. Their short lifespans mean they don't stick around forever. As such, these jovial Pokemon live life to the fullest. From the moment they can fly, they seek to explore the world. It's said to be good luck to see this rare Pokemon streak across the night sky with its glowing wings, commonly mistaken for shooting stars. When they leave this world, it is often seen as a new beginning rather than a bitter goodbye. And now here's my take on its counterpart, Odoborealis. I went with a more upright pose to match Phoenihil, keeping it expressive but not too humanoid. For the tusks and the mouth, I looked to Pokemon like Lowland Sandslash and Ice-Q, using ice as the main clear material. I did leave out the teardrops from the original prompt, which I kind of regret, but I focused on preserving its personality through the eyes. The colors, Icy Blue, Aurora Purple, and Navy, felt like the right mix for a wintry, melancholy vibe. I also put a lot of thought into the Auroras. The lower half adds to this ghostly form. The ones on the flippers suggest melting ice and gloves, and the collar like Aurora mimics a fortune teller's cloak or a winter coat, replacing the original fur. You'll also notice that they have the same starry dots and the patterns that match Phoenihil's glowy red and orange segments, sort of like how all future Paradox Pokemon have these same neon dots and glow patterns. It was fun leaning into its fantastical and even man-made elements, while keeping the walrus shape as the foundation to pair nicely with its Phoenix counterpart. Despite being mortal Pokemon, Odoborealis are said to be able to contact spirits and use their energy to attack. It's said that when a group of these Pokemon gather under an Aurora, they have the ability to resurrect those from the dead. These Pokemon can survive in the coldest of temperatures and seem to have little sensation in their clear bodies. These Pokemon are slow-moving and melancholic, almost as if they are unfeeling. Next, these submissions from Bloody 359 and Jock are very out there, hence why I paired them together, and I commend both artists for taking on their partner's prompt and killing it. Both these artists submitted somewhat vague prompts that remind me of Ultra Beasts or aliens or other paranormal shenanigans. In the case of Jollibon, Jock was asked to draw a being from another world made of ribbon strands. So here's this very gift bag themed design that does a fantastic job with such an out there prompt. I really like the appropriate amount of detail on display. We see only 3 or 4 objects in full, but it really suggests being full of a much larger amount, kinda like Santa's bag. The Pokédoll is a very neat touch. I also like the confidence this artist had to completely detach the body and have it floating above. I will say that it can be a bit distracting to have such a detailed body, but the face, ostensibly, in another location, since it doesn't really provide a clear focal point for our eyes to go to. But of course this is a Pokemon meant to look a bit unknowable, like a biblically accurate angel, and it's hard for me to fully judge in this straight-on sketch that reads more like concept art rather than a dynamic pose found in most final Pokemon designs. And Bloody 359 had perhaps the trickiest job of all artists in this challenge, interpreting Jock's great, although very vague prompt, not even specifying the body shape, typing, or inspiration for the Pokemon, leaving the prompt to an almost abstract feeling, quote, reminiscent of the trappings of a popular winter festival. So Bloody did brilliantly what all great Fakemon artists start with. Pick an object, concept, or cultural inspiration, then pair it with a fitting real-world animal. In this case, Christmas aesthetics like candy canes, stars, and Christmas trees, paired with other sharp and conical things. In this case, those prehistoric cephalopods that have cone-shaped shells. Both aspects balanced each other really well because of the geometry. This Pokemon doesn't feel too plain or too man-made, but both elements are on display and recognizable to someone glancing at it for long enough. I think that's a philosophy that the majority of Pokemon should abide by, so this artist's instincts are really strong. The artist also did a nice job of making this Pokemon feel a bit alien and Ultra Beast-like, with orb-like eyes and very foreign-feeling elements, like all those Christmas details being made of gems. It feels very cute and approachable, but still alien, kinda like Limit and Glamora. Overall, a very well-balanced design. The next pair comes from artists Mice and Churro T Nerd, both of whom made cute, fairly straightforward prompts for winter-themed bug Pokemon. Hyposquito is a frozen mosquito who seems poorly adapted to the winter climate, just as real mosquitoes do poorly in cold temperatures. Meanwhile, Churro's prompt for Tarwraptula describes an arachnid that is adapted to the cold by having a fluffy winter coat, similar to the fuzz of a real tarantula. Hyposquito is a great rendering from an artist who is clearly very confident in an art style of their own, not the Pokemon or Sugimori style, which I always like seeing with these art challenge submissions. The Pokemon instincts are still very much there. It's hard to give an insect an expressive face, but this one is very entertaining, with a drippy red snout and flushed cheeks to convey the concept of discomfort in a winter setting. One aspect that I would fix, however, is making the ice aspects a bit more varied from one another. They're all prism-shaped with the same exact number of edges and thickness and opacity, whereas I think it would have been more interesting to have flat, slender ones for the wings and antenna-like ones that are thinner and longer. I'm not sure that the feet ones are necessary either. They feel a bit cluttered for a small design with not a lot of room for real estate. However, I like how the ones on the butt especially look like a virus head, which may be intentional, and either way is fitting because presumably this Pokemon has a cold. Its counterpart, Tarwraptula, is very charming. I love how this artist does what I always praise in Pokemon designs, conveying texture. Having these minuscule hairs on the head, scarf, and arms are so easy to do, but they go a long way to showing that this Pokemon is fluffy all over. It's amazing how our brains fill in missing information, right? Less is always more with Pokemon design. However, on the topic of detail, one aspect of the design that I would fix is having what I assume are the lower sets of arms be a bit larger and perhaps similar to the top ones to look more spider-like. You really want all aspects of Pokemon details to have meaning, not just adding details to fill space or for detail's sake. The top arms are excellent with those snowball mitten-like hands, and I really wouldn't mind seeing them duplicated since we expect arachnid Pokemon to have more than 4 limbs, and right now it looks a tad incomplete. However, the concepts for both of these Pokemon are very charming. Next, I paired these prompts from Denoil and Shield Does Pixels because both work together to illustrate winter as a time of serenity and rest. We have Chroolung, or Chroolung, a grassy dragon who grows leaves that can be used in charming teas, and Mellowdee, a fairy-like Pokemon known for singing entrancing songs this time of year. The interpretation of the Chroolung prompt from Shield Does Pixels is a promising start. I like how the horns of the dragon have these floral, chain-like things that remind me of both sagely Greek laurels and more mellow, hippie flower crowns. This is a great instinct with Pokemon design, always, incorporating tertiary details, in this case the flower crown, to act as a third element behind the dragon and the T, and using that to flesh out the details within the design and inform the Pokemon's personality. In this case, a mellow little guy. However, I would like to see the artist flesh out the sketch a bit more with some color, with a more clear personality, and a more distinct body shape that isn't just a plain dragon, but this sketch is a very good start. Meanwhile, its counterpart, Mellowdee, is another design like Vestivo that takes a very vague prompt and runs with it confidently, with rock-solid Sugimori style rendering and a very original but believable feeling Pokemon. For some reason, the horns and the vaguely reptilian face feel kinda nostalgic, like a Generation 1, 2, or 3 mythical Pokemon. One suggestion for improvement from me is that again, I like to see texture at least alluded to, and I'm really having trouble picturing what that tail is made out of. Is it supposed to be silky and translucent like a curtain, or are these sharp, solid icicles? If I was able to redesign this, I would actually cut it entirely and duplicate the style of the cape/wings, since I think a Pokemon this small doesn't need two contrasting big elements on display, especially if that contrast isn't part of the concept, if that makes sense. This Pokemon seems more angelic and is meant to be a ghost and a psychic type, so more flowy, ethereal wings makes more sense than this ice-like tail. This pair of counterparts from Skunky Spinda and Escondida 17 was very entertaining. Here are submissions for Popsiclaw and Blizzarack, a pair of ice types who both have utilitarian hands of sorts, claws that double as both ice cream scoopers and snow that doubles as shovels. Plus, I like the idea of pairing these two submissions who are very small and very big. Perhaps imagining Popsiclaw using Blizzarack as an icy fortress or a home. This interpretation of Popsiclaw is very cute, and I love the effort that went towards making this Pokemon look like ice cream. I always like a Pokemon that has a clear double concept. However, I think this is another example of a small design that could feature some subtlety or simplification. I don't think we need the waffle cone patterning on all the limbs, and the sprout on the top of the head feels a bit unfitting and random for the concept. Unless I'm missing something, of course. I also feel like the mustache could have been reworked as a crab mandible made out of the same snow or ice the body is, rather than a completely different color that makes it look detached and man-made. Its counterpart is the opposite, a much simpler design. This is once again an example of a very solid concept art that I would love to see reworked to a more dynamic pose that highlights this Pokemon's size. I also would love to see this design look a bit less like Palossand and more like an original counterpart to Popsiclaw, something that I don't fault the artist at all for, since I never specified not to do convergent forms when I put out the call for this challenge. I really do love the concepts for both of these Pokemon though, enough that I redesigned them myself. For Popsiclaw, I opted for a more refined version of Spinda's rendition, with much more sparing waffle cone details and more spots that resemble chocolate sauce in the ice cream scooper claws. I really wanted this Pokemon to look like it was covered in snow that resembled ice cream or perhaps made out of it, so I opted for a much more limited color palette. I even feel like the blue that I had in the limbs was too much, but you can let me know. I also wanted a cuter face that looks less like an old man, but I worry that my eyes were too generic and not the crab-like ones that the original artist had. Overall, I am pretty happy with this redesign though. These small Pokemon use their specially adapted claws to scoop up snow and feed on the microorganisms present. When threatened, they will launch them at enemies in compact balls with extreme precision. Additionally, it has been seen crushing berries to enhance the flavor of the snow that it eats. A popular dessert was inspired by this Pokemon and enjoyed by many in the Alola region. Next up, my redesign of Blizzarack opts for a more distinct body shape inspired by igloos, but is also like a living golem with limbs, rather than a man-made castle that sits statically. I also wanted the blocks of ice to look chunky and imperfect, forming the scowl and frown that I find to be fairly expressive. I also made sure to incorporate the same chimney or spire on the head that the original design had, and I made both hands smaller shovels. Looking back, I wish I made them different from one another, but I think this design works well with a lot of details but very few colors to balance it out. And I enjoy how I made this Pokemon dynamic and aggressive looking, but still believably protective. I could easily imagine its counterpart, Popsiclaw, scuttling inside the igloo for protection during an epic snowball fight. While this Pokemon may look like it has a chilly personality, it is not uncommon to see Blizzarack harboring small Pokemon within its igloo. These Pokemon are perfectly safe to play around, or even in Blizzarack's body, as it is known to primarily feed off of condensed water vapor. Its interior is surprisingly warm to the touch. Many Pokemon praise this ability for its use in keeping things toasty in the strongest snowstorms. Now how about we transition to a darker side of winter with the next few pairings. I absolutely adore this pair from Sassafrasnid and Jack of All Trades, depicting a ghostly feline and canine Pokemon, the dog Hounoon being based on Welsh legends about heroic spirits, and the cat Gryline being based on both the Yule Lads and the Yule Cat, mischievous spirits from Iceland. Naturally, I had to pair these two artists up. Sassafrasnid's rendition of Hounoon prompts is truly excellent. There's so many wonderful details here from both a conceptual and artistic standpoint, like how the ghostly goo looks like angelic wings and halo to reinforce its heroism, and how perfectly the white transitions to red down at the legs. Sassafrasnid is a master of the Pokemon art style, and this is perhaps one of the strongest individual submissions in this entire challenge, so I don't really have any critiques. The counterpart Gryline from Jack of All Trades is also quite nice. I like how this design really does look like a cat, with more unsettling humanoid elements in the face, reminiscent of the Cheshire Cat, but also the trope of an old wrinkled hag. I think this Pokemon would have benefited from maybe a bit more detail on the color on the body, like some stripes on the furry cat elements, and maybe some tatters on the purple cape covering the long body, because as it stands, it's a lot of detail in the face and then a lot of visual real estate that is not fully being utilized. However, I think by and large, this is an excellent design as well, and the proportions and personality feel perfect to me. This next pair comes to us from users Enderscore and Espirito with Albatrust and Ghultide. This is another rock-solid pair of Pokemon, a heroic albatross-like one, saving people from frozen waters, and a mischievous goat-like creature playing pranks on people in frozen landscapes, really capturing the naughty and the nice vibes with this one. Albatrust is a very solid design. This artist has mastered the Sugimori style through and through, down to the highlights on the wings that I am truly jealous of. I also like the colors on this Pokemon. Red and blue are a classic pairing and make this Pokemon look fantastical without being unnatural. I only wish that this was rendered in a more dynamic illustration, as I'm sure this heroic Pokemon could muster a more expressive pose than this. And its counterpart, Ghultide, is also very nice. They work out well as counterparts, since this one has the same colors as Albatrust but darker, with white swapped for dark gray, perhaps the most counterpartish Pokemon in this video. I only wish the head was a bit bigger, but since even fully evolved Pokemon typically have bigger heads than you would see in real-life animals, and this one feels a bit too real-life goat-like. Otherwise, again, an excellent submission. Congrats to both artists here. These next submissions also form a spooky holiday pair. Behold Ox Weevunn, drawn by Threat to Swine, a ghostly serpent made out of icy haze, and its counterpart Threat to Swine's Ambitter, drawn by Auk. I love this pairing of another winter mischief spirit that only an expert tracker like this wolf Pokemon could hunt down and defeat. Weevunn is just insane. I love the colors on this thing. Always a fan of Pokemon that have misleading typings, hence why this one has a vibrant, almost flame-like pattern, despite being a ghost and a water type. I also like the idea of showing its ghostliness through its hair. An amazing depiction, given that this is a marker drawing. It really shows that this Pokemon's general demeanor, having wispy hair, makes it look like an old witch or a spirit. However, I think this Pokemon could benefit from the classic Pokemon design philosophy of balance. That is, giving an otherwise scary design some cute features, or vice versa. This Pokemon is very hardcore, and that's not a bad thing, but I think it would benefit from one or two small changes that make it fit more into Pokemon's traditional art style. But this is an excellent piece of art. And Ox Ambitter is charming in its own right. Loving the Generation 1 vibes on this guy, and has just enough details to feel like a Pokemon, those eyes in particular, alongside decent contrast with the body between different colored segments, However, given the ghost and the ice typings especially, I'd love to see even more colors on display or perhaps some fantastical features, ghostly eyes, tails, claws, or something else. Don't be afraid to exaggerate proportions, and really go overboard if it's a supernatural Pokemon. It doesn't have to look like a wolf one-to-one in a cartoon style. And last but very not least, I appreciated these submissions from Mage Queen and Forgotten Moonweaver. Mage gives us this entry for Snarland, a clever grass and dragon type snake made of garland, and perhaps the most recognizable symbol of Christmas, since it can come in wreaths, longer straight strands, and many other forms. So perfect for a serpentine Pokemon. Naturally, we had to pair this with Moonweaver's Menelody, a Minora-like Pokemon that's a classic fairy-type Objectmon, like Klefki or Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast. As a Jewish boy myself, I always appreciate seeing a good depiction of Hanukkah as a symbol for the winter holiday season. So of course, these two iconic symbols of the biggest winter holidays, at least in my life, and in many parts of the US, had to be paired together. Moonweaver did a nice job with Mage Queen's prompt in this semi-pixel art style. Very adorable, and I appreciate the artist taking advantage and honoring the prompt's request for multiple forms for this Pokemon. Just as a real-life garland can have many lights or fixtures on it in different colors. I'm always a sucker for form change Pokemon, so I get a kick out of Fakemon artists taking pride in their art, and taking form differences for the concept basically as far as they can go. I only wish I could see this Pokemon rendered in a more traditional illustration so I can see the face, since I imagine it could be a little more expressive. Menelody is also charming. I appreciate the insistence on making the many arms of a Minora's candelabra the arms of this Pokemon. Much harder to do with this odd shape than a Pokemon like Lampin, say. One area for improvement that I would suggest is making the face or the legs of this Pokemon purely candle-like rather than humanoid. Perhaps that means a bit of drippy candle texture or a more slender elongated feature in the shape of a candle rather than the humanoid rounded head. As I mentioned, texture can go a long way in suggesting the function or makeup of a Pokemon, even in the most simple art style such as this. With all this in mind, this was yet another pair that I decided I wanted to take a stab at redrawing, because I love the concept so much. Without further ado, here's my rendition of Snarland. I opted for a shorter body just like the original one, leaning kind of into starter design territory in some ways given the grass typing. I also kept the body ornament simple, especially for what I imagine to be a first stage Pokemon, so just some holly and berries will do. I also made sure to add clear delineation between the body and the leaves and the berries covering it, making it clear that this Pokemon covers itself with leaves and is not made out of it, kind of like Burmy. These warm-blooded Pokemon soak themselves with foliage to keep warm during the winter season, using the sticky saliva from their tongues to affix leaves and berries along their elongated bodies. Though green and red seems to be their favorite colors, these Pokemon may come in a variety of colors. They are very friendly and popular with children, who Snarland will strive to protect and make happy at all times. They are also common sights at wintertime gatherings, acting as living decor. And for its counterpart, I opted for a design that has a basis as an Objectmon rather than a living creature with Minora features. I thought it would make this Pokemon have a much more memorable silhouette, and I could add the face onto it in a memorable way at the top in the center stem of the candelabra, and I'm happy to say I succeeded there. I'm always so neurotic about giving Pokemon I design memorable and detailed eyes, so this was a great reminder that two little dots are more than fine for certain concepts, especially silly ones. I also kept the flame simple, repeated small wisps coming out of its pipe-like arms. So instead of any candle wax present, this Pokemon is all shiny metal, and pretty simple at that. I figured with so much visual emphasis on its curved arms and many flames, I could just let the body speak for itself, and not have a ton of ridges or lines or ornamental details that I initially wanted to do to round out the Minora. I have to say, this redesign ended up being my favorite in the entire video, and I promise I'm not biased. I was just really proud of how I took a concept I didn't think I could pull off and create what I think is a pretty charming object-based Pokemon. This Pokemon is said to have come to life in commemoration of a great miracle it witnessed 3,000 years ago. Its lights are symbolic of the event. Each year, these Pokemon will gather to go sing and celebrate the anniversary of the miracle. Flames ignited by this Pokemon can last 8 days without being extinguished. It shares joy with those who gather with it, and it's a tradition to eat foods fried in oil that has boiled under its mystical flames. And with that, we've gone through 20 submissions divided into 10 counterpart pairs, covering many aspects of the winter season, from dark winter spirits, to the concept of giving, to rest, to play, and to the most memorable holiday festivities. Which pairing was your favorite? How did these artists do pulling off their partner's written prompt? And which of my redesigns was your favorite? Thank you so much for following along both today and throughout all of 2024. It's been a slower year, both for the Pokemon Company itself and for this channel in certain periods. However, I'm feeling really optimistic about 2025. As mentioned, it will be the year my long-awaited Fakemon region project debuts on this channel, in a multi-episode visual novel epic. It's been years of work behind the scenes, and a lot of heavy lifting in 24 that had me slow down uploads for some time. I really appreciate the patience because I believe the designs, characters, story, and region are all worth the wait. Of course, I'm endlessly grateful to all of you for your patience and for being a part of this incredible community each and every day, over on my community Discord, here on YouTube, through Patreon, or wherever. Happy holidays to all of you and your family, no matter what or how you celebrate. And I'll see you in 2025.